It's really an incredible honor and pleasure to have Ron with us. As I appended myself to him for those 2 days, and we sat at dinner, and I asked him theoretical questions about, okay, we got these guys, it looks like they might be able to supply something. Can we actually do this? He said, of course we can do it. In fact, there is a big and growing market for exactly what we're trying to do. So Ron, I'm gonna let you self-introduce, and then for 2 hours, we're gonna look at have a presentation, but this is very participatory, right? It's not a classroom, it's a discussion. And then, as you saw from the agenda, we will have this discussion and then have lunch. We'll probably, as part of lunch, tour the facilities here, see what's possible up and down in this building. And then we will reconvene and start refining ideas. And then before we leave, we'll have some action steps to take. What are we going to do following up with this? And I will make sure that we'll be on that, right? So Ron, Doetch, thank you very much for being here.
Well, I'm honored by the opportunity to come and speak to you folks. When Bob approached me, he was so enthusiastic and so excited. It's like we've put everything together for Fairfield to be on the map as a local food supplier of the world. And he was very
And beyond.
passionate, you know. And I said, so what are you missing? And he said, well, we got everything. We got the buyers, we got the warehouse, we got everything. We just don't have the farmers. So I got a few messages here today. There's of the discussion we've already had. There's multiple things that have come up, and I left a lot of things behind, so I won't have sides on a lot of different topics. I'm going to try to stay on topic, and that basically is, you know, how are we going to craft a vision, intergenerational for the future, growing produce and other crops on Iowa farms that are economically viable and environmentally acceptable and socially acceptable. So, you know, I want to talk about first about why hasn't a local food system reemerged. When I grew up on a dairy farm in northern Illinois, when it comes silo filling time, boys didn't go to school. You helped on the farm. You helped through corn harvest. I didn't like school. Didn't like milking those cows the time I got to be 18. It was a motivation for me to go to college. So I went to college and then went right back into agriculture. So in 2011, Jim Patchett and I formed Solutions in the Land, a for-profit consulting company to do whole system farm plans. So the food and farming systems that we've been talking about here today is really just one system. In 1937, Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, "A nation that destroys its soil destroys itself." So if we look at chronic illnesses today that affect 2/3 of our population, we're that sick as a society, our soil must be sick. And I'm going to show you a few slides today that will show you that indeed our soil is sick. A little bit more of my background. Since leaving Atoshu, which was a Japanese international trading company, where back in the 90s, we started writing programs to connect the farmer to the end user. I introduced a project called Reintroduction of Oats for Profit in the Environment in a Corn and Soy Rotation. We did that in conjunction with the Practical Farmers of Iowa. We had Quaker Oats to tell us they would buy all the oats we could produce in the project for $2 a bushel, which at the time, oats were selling for about $1 a bushel. It was 27 years ago that we signed up Steve Hickenbottom to grow oats for the project and be an ambassador. We got Quaker to give out really nice jackets because as we did, we were looking at the barriers to scaling up small grains 30 years ago. So what's it going to take? Well, all the Pioneer Seed guys all have Pioneer Seed jackets and caps. So we said, okay,
I tell you, Troy,
merge.
We got hats here, we got Ideal Energy hats right here.
So we got Quaker Oats to give embroidered jackets that said 100 bushel club. And at the time, the Iowa state average for oat production was 42 bushel to the acre. And so, someone at Iowa State asked how come it was so low, and I was talking about 100 bushel oats. I said, well, that's because the Iowa State has helped keep the yield at 42 bushel per acre. That's another story. Anyway, every farmer in Iowa scaled over 100 bushel oats that year and got a Quaker Oats jacket. I see some of those around there today, and I asked Bob if Steve could be here and I could pick on him a little bit. So we did a project in New York. Peter Buffett bought a 1,600 acre farm in the Hudson Valley by the Ashokan Dam that supplies the water to New York City. He wanted to become the most sustainable farm in the world, not in New York. That farm won't work sustainably because it's in a floodplain. There were a lot of reasons for it to not work. And, you know, it was one of those projects that I probably should have turned and walked away from early, but we stuck it out. And the only reason I'm telling you the story is I had another project with the Alameda County Sheriff's Department in Oakland, California. And here was their dilemma. One of the deputies said, I don't know what's gonna happen when we have the whole Alameda County community in jail, but at the rate we jail people, we're gonna find out pretty soon. So their big idea was to provide community gardens for the residents so that the policing of Oakland and in Alameda County could be done in a way that was synergistic with the community. And we worked on that project a long time. It was really, really difficult. So when I look at this project here, you have so many elements in place. And I appreciate the backgrounds of everyone that's here today. It's kind of interesting how the group is self-sorted. Over here, we have the market. Don't mean to offend anybody, but if I don't offend someone, come and see me after the meeting. And in the middle, we got the advocates. And then we got the farmers at that end. So the process just kind of flows this way. Production, aggregation, into your trucks. So I worked for Atoshu for a number of years to put integrity into grain systems. And, you know, in the 90s, there was no integrity in grain systems. And we're here today to talk about produce. Why am I talking about grain? Because when you grow produce, you need to rotate your crops into other crops and not grow vegetables every year. Therefore, probably a small grain will work well for you there. So Atoshu was willing to support my advocacy for extended rotations in agriculture, healthy soil, and all the other things that went with it. But then Starling came along. Does everybody remember Starling? Mm-hmm. We had 366,000 acres of commodity corn in this country that had an unapproved GMO event in it that caused an allergic reaction in some people. You scarcely heard about it in the United States. In Tokyo, if you were a trader and you traded grain and you were caught with grain with Starlink, it was mandatory jail. And so my boss would call me up and say, catch the plane at noon at O'Hare, you'll be here, you'll land at 3 o'clock Sunday afternoon, and we're gonna go settle down one of these accounts that's all upset about GMOs and grain and Starling. So in doing that, we'd already set this thing up for mad cow disease, and so we'd set it up around food safety. And all of a sudden our project got wild. But it gave me a better understanding working on a global scale of how our food system works as opposed to, you know, how a local system works. But it turns out that there's a lot of values in that international trading system when it comes to produce and how to nest into the market. So today I brought a limited number of these books for producers or people who want to get into aggregation. And it basically is the crops that you can grow here in Iowa and how the buyer over here wants to see that crop when you present it to him after he opens the tailgate of that truck. So I think, that's one of the gaps, but let's look at some more. Next slide. I use this picture, this is actually of Charles's farm, and I shot that with a drone. It's really a two-dimensional, but it went to three-dimensional. And I think we have to look at our farm and if we assess our agriculture and our farms in the community, we have to be looking three-dimensional. What's the water holding capacity of that soil? For every % of organic matter, that soil holds 16,000 gallons of water, and our soil scientist over here might correct me. So at 4% organic matter, you're holding about 64,000 gallons of water per acre per year. So what does a 64,000 gallon water tank look like on your farm if you were to put a 64,000 gallon water tank on every acre? It would be unsightly, unmanageable, but yet those are the gifts of nature that we have. I've been asked to work on several indoor agriculture projects, and I refuse to anymore because I don't like blemishes on my resume. It won't work. Why? Because outside we get plenty of sunlight, we get plenty of rainfall, we have rich fertile soil, we have know-how, and we barely break even. Now, can we haul all that stuff indoors and make money somehow? It's illogical. Yes, sir.
You said three dimensions. I like to add the fourth dimension, time, which is
Time, absolutely.
seasons.
I think everyone in here has got something to contribute, and this next exercise, late yesterday I decided, no, what we really need to do is to frame out this system of what it is, what it isn't, and what players already have a piece of that puzzle. There's a lot of expertise in this room, and I'd like to think each of you have a piece of the puzzle. If we can collaboratively put them all together, we can have a local food system that is economically sound. I harp on economic soundness because I work with a lot of farmers in a lot of areas. I have never had a farmer that wouldn't listen about an opportunity to make more money. A legitimate opportunity, not Jerusalem artichokes, and not high oil corn. Now I'll tell you, Telshu was the largest exporter of high oil corn. And I went to Des Moines many times to meet with DuPont about our struggles with high oil corn. And the only problem with high oil corn was it wouldn't yield and it wouldn't stand and it wouldn't maintain quality. Other than that, I guess it was okay. But we found a substitute for high oil corn and we dropped it, and that whole program went away. We were doing 20% of the high oil corn, and it was not a viable crop. We have to keep profitability front and center to keep farmers interested. And I think, one of the things that I like to talk about are those things that we can ensure profitability. So why don't we already have it? Iowa consistently is the largest corn producing state, producing some 20% or more of all United States corn production, and the focus of Iowa is corn production. And soybeans is a part of the monoculture of corn. It provides 40 pounds of nitrogen for next year's corn crop. It takes the field out of corn for a year. Many farmers have found with the high chemistry agriculture that we practice today, you can grow corn on corn just as well as an extended rotation. Why? Because we haven't found a way to get soil below 2% organic matter. We have farmed it down to that, and we're putting fungicides on our corn 3 times a year. We're using chemistry on our corn that we never used to have to use. Our cost of production has gone up. In the turn of the 20th century, it took a couple days of labor to produce a bushel of corn. They said when they ran the thrashing machines for wheat, for a day running on a thrashing machine, it took 2 days of labor. So back when we hand shut corn, it took days of labor in a bushel of corn. In 2024, the labor in a bushel of corn is measured in seconds. It's that expanded in production capacity. So we've not only exited a lot of farm families off farms, but we've eliminated the need for farm labor for the most part. For the most part, now that we've had autonomous driving tractors and combines for years, but we can't get the farmer out of the cab. And just another aside to that, we constantly hear the average age of the farmer is 58 years old. In 20 years, we're gonna turn over 3/4 of the land. I heard that 20 years ago. It's not happening, I'll tell you why. Dad now, even if he's in a wheelchair, can get in the cab of the combine. We can't get Dad out of the cab, he's not gonna retire. And so the average age just, it stays right there. We did a project for Jasper County. We did the 2050 plan. We did the agriculture portion of the comprehensive county plan. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with comprehensive county plans, but every county is supposed to have one. It's new that in doing comprehensive county planning, that the people organizing the planning have invited agriculture people to be at the table. The #1 activity in almost every Iowa county is agriculture, and this is the first time you're being represented. But the reason I brought up Jasper County, the farmers there said most of us have bought up the farmland of those that wanted to leave. And in Jasper County, that land is predominantly owned by Jasper County farmers. In fact, nationally, 75% of farmland trades are never public. They're never public on Zillow or anything else. It's neighbor to neighbor, it's people that know people. So people are attached to land. When you kick a 40-year tenant off your farm, do we really do that, Carol?
Yeah.
Okay, when you kick a 40-year tenant off your farm, it's really painful because they're attached to that farm much like a child. So my message on that is, I've worked a lot in Iowa. I've worked in a lot of Iowa counties. I worked on the disaster relief in 2019 from the floods, Hamburg, Iowa. In Iowa, agriculture is important. It's important for the economy. It's important in every community. And I love working in Iowa for that reason. You're not gonna go get an adequate part-time job, full-time job, and farm as a hobby for the most part. If you farm in Wisconsin, Northern Illinois, there are plenty of job opportunities. You get a job, that's your career, and you can farm on weekends, and that's good enough. So things don't necessarily have to make sense, but I like to say in Iowa, your agriculture design has to make money, it has to make sense, and it needs to be environmentally sound. Cover crop adoption in the state of Iowa was more rapid than any other state in the union. And why is that? Because farmers know that farmers are gonna continue to own and operate that land. It's gonna be the kids. It's intergenerational, as I've said. I think we have to look intergenerationally. So I would say the reason we don't have a local food system now boils right down to we don't have the infrastructure. Mr. Farmer can't go to the buyer at the warehouse and say, what do you need for next year? How much butternut squash do you need? How much acorn? How much carrots? What do you need? What can I produce? Why should these farms be viable? Because they have flexibility. They can turn on a dime. So next year, maybe Hy-Vee doesn't need as much butternut squash. Maybe COVID hits and societal norms shift. And so when societal norms shift, things have to shift with it. And so, that 10-acre produce farm has a lot of ability to satisfy the buyer's shifting demand. And I realize there are a lot of things that are pretty consistent. People are gonna keep eating 46 pounds of potatoes. They're gonna keep eating 0.4 pounds of kohlrabi. How's that kohlrabi on the wholesale market? So my wife runs a CSA, and whenever we have a new subscriber, they call her up and say, what the heck is this thing? It's too big to be a radish. So.
Kohlrabi fries are gonna be all the rage.
All right, there you go. Okay. So, what we did when I worked for the Japanese is we sat with Asahi Beer and said, you know, what are your needs for next year? What are your needs gonna be the year after that? We have the flexibility, we can change things now. So you can offer the buyer flexibility, the buyer can offer to market your overage and underage. And I don't mean sizes, I mean, production-wise. We contracted 9 semi-loads of butternut squash in western Wisconsin with the Amish farmers. We booked those for delivery in Milwaukee, and they showed up with 11 semi-loads. And Paulette Hardin called me up and said, what am I gonna do with these 2 extra semi-loads of butternut squash? It's like, I don't know, figure it out, you know, give them away. But if you can put them on the end caps, you know, you can push things out if they're in surplus. The farmer has no ability to do that. So we somehow have to get that system of ecology working in business transactions. Next slide, please. So a lot of people will say, well, we can't grow produce in Iowa because the weather's such a disadvantage. In case you haven't noticed, it freezes in the winter. So California, Mexico, Florida produce a lot of the food that we eat. Yes, they have year-round climates. In Florida, I work with a 450-acre tomato grower. He has about a 3-week window to deliver his tomatoes. He has a slot in a national grocery chain. If his tomatoes miss his slot, he's out of the market for another year. And so we were running some trials. The weather got hot. He missed his opportunity. You know what we have here? We still have a weather that behaves, for the most part, in the state of Iowa. Yes, it freezes in the winter. Yes, it's cold. Yes, perennial crops may need to be bedded. You may need to put straw around those aronia bushes. I don't think you have to, but anyway, you know, we can't buy into, we can't produce good food in the state of Iowa. We can't. Next slide, please. So I've framed my presentation today around 10 buckets, 10 boxes that I think we need to check to go forward. And as we think about this vision, we share that vision, we can check a lot of the buckets. So my number one is to assess what our agriculture assets are out here. In the state of Wisconsin, we got the governor behind an idea to inventory all the idle assets in the state of Wisconsin. There are so many grain elevators sitting empty. A lot of them have OD haulers in them. They have cleaners in them. They have lots of things. A lot of them are just sitting empty, abandoned. So when I look at assessing the agriculture assets, I think the farms speak for themselves. It's good, rich soil. It got stable weather. What are the underutilized? What are the microclimates? So why is it that Muscatine claims to be the watermelon capital of the world? Really? They don't produce a lot of watermelons anymore in Muscatine because Muscatine County grows really good corn. But melons, you know, that whole region became known for its cantaloupe and watermelon, and they virtually don't grow them anymore. So what is the Fairfield watermelon, melon makeup that we could go to the market with? Infrastructure and support development. I just keep coming back. When I look at this project, I look at this area of the world, I just keep coming back to the same thing. There, you know, if you're producing corn, you go down to the grain elevator and you ask the buyer if he's gonna have a place to put your corn away this fall because corn's only $3.23 a bushel. I'm not gonna sell at that price. So I'm gonna deliver my corn to you. I want you to store the grain. I'm probably gonna pull it out of storage next July. I'll price it somewhere in between when the market's up, okay? Conversation repeats itself thousands of times a day, right? That doesn't exist in the produce business in the state of Iowa. It does in Michigan, it does in Wisconsin, in the northern parts of the sand belt, because they have pack houses. And so even the potato growers in Wisconsin know that they're gonna go to the pack house and say, how many potatoes can I bring to you next year? And you know, you're asking for those blondes, those yellow potatoes, but I really like growing the reds. And the pack house is gonna say consistently, we get too many red potatoes, we need more yellow potatoes. We don't have that conversation yet here, unless it's with Tony, and I'm glad to hear about Tony's operation, because you say you're buying from hundreds of farms, you must have farmers that call you and say, what are you gonna need? What can you
To be
put-"
clear, it's only about 50 pounds or 100 pounds of potatoes, it's not very much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that infrastructure has got to be in place. Next slide, please. So crop selection, when we talk about produce, we're talking about this big area when some things are short seasons, middle season, full season. And then we have things that are low margin crops, medium margin crops, high margin crops. So we're gonna have a mix of that. Well, if we plant our brassicas in late March, early April, we'll get those off in time to come along with another crop, so we'll have sequential planting on that acre. And then we could come back on that acre and plant some of your wheat. And yeah, we only got 10 acres, but we got 10 farmers doing it, so that's 100 acres, so we can deliver 70 bulk bags of baking quality wheat. So what I'm saying is, scale has failed us. We scaled up corn and bean production. We're not making any more money growing corn and beans because we scaled up. We're just doing a lot more work, we're handling a lot more grain, and we're still not making very much. Or we're losing a little bit, or we don't lose quite as much as we did, or one of those in between. So why don't we develop inside our own footprint? So when I talk about assessing the farm, I've got a field out here that's got 6% organic matter. It's gonna grow vegetables really good. And I'm probably not gonna have to irrigate it because we're probably gonna get frequent enough rains that the crop can be grown dry land as opposed to irrigated. And so selecting the crops is a production decision, it's a risk decision, and then you're gonna go to the buyer and see what the market compromises are or aren't. And so it's that information that you have to have before you're gonna make a cropping plan that's gonna include produce for the wholesale market. My next bucket is market development, and I don't think market development is an issue. I think in the state of Iowa, you have enough buyers for produce at a price point that operating efficiently will allow you to meet that market and be profitable at that level. What skews the economic analysis is what you put in for yield and what you put in for price received. So we've seen butternut squash on the wholesale go between 10 and 70 cents a pound. Most of the time, it kind of hovers under 50 cents. It's a crop that can flex in production. If a lot of people are growing butternut squash and we have a really good year, we could have an oversupply of butternut squash. Butternut squash prices can fall. So what I always like to do is work with a buyer that will do flat pricing. So what I mean by that, if you take, do you put out a daily availability sheet to your stores?
I'm personally not on that side of it,
Okay,
but
I think they do.
yeah.
We do that weekly
Okay.
to Hy-Vee.
Yeah.
And I believe they send that to the stores
okay. And so you do that pretty much on a daily basis based on what coming into the cooler and
weekly. But
what you know
For
we have.
local grown update, we have 3-week period that we show availability and volume, because if we tell Hy-Vee it's light volume, that means we can't promote it as an ad volume. But if it's heavy, we have enough product for that. Now for food service, even light availability is usually plenty for what their demands are, but for a retailer, it's a little heavier.
So for the producer, you're a couple steps away from that. You don't have that knowledge. So I was executive director of Michael Fields Ag Institute for 7 years, where we had 1,000 acres of land and we were promoting local, sustainable foods. We were producing some things for Whole Foods, but we were supposed to be a research and education outreach institute. And our garden manager, we had a store in the Milwaukee Public Market, and our garden manager was complaining that he had pallets of leftover organic bell peppers in October or November. Well, anyone in the produce business knows that come October, November, your opportunity to buy organic bell peppers is slim to none. And so they were up to like $5.50 on the wholesale. And Matt came to me and he's like, I got 10 cents a pound for our peppers, you know, I just unloaded it. Well, we had no knowledge of what the daily markets were doing. So once we got in the Milwaukee Public Market and we couldn't supply enough from our own farm and we started buying from an aggregator, we started looking at availability sheets and pricing, and we discovered, hey, we ought to be producing bell peppers for October and November. The heck with this July stuff where they're at the lowest price. So getting into the produce business, one of the things a buyer can do, and I can't speak for the buyer, but one thing they can do is flat price. In other words, if they go back and say, I was paying 60 cents a pound for butternut, and then a month later it went to 20 cents a pound, a month later it went to 10 cents a pound, I'm gonna look at the volumes I bought, I'm gonna look at my average cost, and Mr. Jefferson County, Iowa farmer, my average cost to buy butternut squash last year was this. So I'll pay you that for all the squash you can produce on this many acres. And so the buyer then is managing the over and under production. The buyer is not making you try to outmarket a wholesale market that you have no information about. It's kind of what we do on the grain deal, right? Corn isn't high priced enough, so we'll buy it back on the Board of Trade, make our money on the Board of Trade. It's like, if I knew how to make money on the Board of Trade, I wouldn't be farming. So how can I put my corn in storage at the local elevator and then go play with those guys? They know the game, I don't know it. So and this was very true in my years with the Japanese, is they went to the next step. If we were supplying Ajinomoto. They had chosen Atoshu as a supplier, so we were doing a lot of originations and a lot of things for Ajinomoto. So Atoshu bought 20% of Ajinomoto, which was the modus operandi of the global trading company. If you have a trading partner that you can't afford to lose as a client, buy 20% of them and sit on their board. We have board members on DuPont, we have board members on Monsanto. You want interlocking boards, and then you buy 20% of your biggest clients, you've locked that in for my grandkids. I don't know how many times I heard that in negotiations. Yes, but this is what I want for my grandkids, intergenerational. So flat pricing works. We did it with Asahi beer. We did 120,000 metric tons of corn. We locked the bases in at 10 over the river, delivered the upper Miss, and farmers don't have a lot of export opportunity on the upper Mississippi. So what we do, we got those farmers to store that grain till June, July, and August. And we knew that coming out of Minnesota, going on the upper Mississippi, that grain was going to be in great shape. And so we looked at our average basis, and our average basis would go into a plus number because we bought a lot out of Missouri and Arkansas on the Mississippi River, and we'd have to pay a high basis to get that to move to the river early. And so when we averaged the bases out, we said we can pay 10 over on the wholesale at the river, and then we'll charge Asahi beer accordingly, and we know that what we've got in is 10 over the market. We don't care what the Board of Trade's doing. So that program goes on yet today. We put that together in the late 90s, and farmers are still producing for that contract, and they're still at 10 over the river. And I think the thing about nesting with the buyer and nesting with the warehouse and collaboratively working together is you can start to cement in longer term relationships and cement in things that are longer that everyone can live with, so you don't have that variability. Take as much variability out as possible, and I think, the buyer, is gonna want the same. So in market development, I think the work that needs to be done there is in a competitive space. And I like to talk, Bob and I talked this morning at breakfast about this. There's non-competitive space, and you're working with for-profit businesses, so there's competitive space. And then there's a space we're working in now that I like to call pre-competitive space. So in pre-competitive space, we can talk about aggregation, we can talk about warehouse, we can talk about getting a grant for the guy to run the warehouse, that type of thing. But we're not in the competitive space yet. And so once the warehouse starts running, it's going to start to operate on company norms, and it's gonna operate at the speed of business. And the produce business is kind of a 24/7 business. I asked an aggregator in Chicago, down in Englewood on the south side, if you wanna learn things about the produce business, go to the south side of Chicago and talk to the aggregators down there that are delivering to 600 stores daily. They'll give you an education in a hurry. And they start loading trucks at 2 or 3 in the morning. And the day before, they were bringing in the bulk pallets from farms, and then they were packing them down to a family of 4, and they're reloading on the truck at 3 in the morning to deliver to grocery stores. So we're gonna hook into that system, and we're gonna hook into a data system where no human touches the data after it leaves your farm. So that UPC code, that QR code, PLUs, you put that PLU on that product, we scan it when the trucker gets there, he doesn't punch in any numbers. That scan is gonna tell him how many zucchinis are in each box, how many boxes are on that pallet. They're gonna get repacked to families of 4, they're gonna get delivered to the local Hy-Vees. When they go into the local Hy-Vee, the data is gonna be scanned into the register. It takes care of their inventory, it takes care of their pricing. It's going to compute their shrink, and by shrink, that's the amount of produce that was shipped to Hy-Vee and the amount of produce that never got paid for at Hy-Vee. So if it went bad, if it sat out on a produce cart for too long and it got warm and the manager had to just throw it out, that's shrink. So what Walmart does, if you want to sell to Walmart, when you deliver your green beans, you'll get paid when those green beans go through the cash register.
Oh, man.
You won't get paid before. So what are they doing? Walmart has you manage all their shrink, which if they would pay you a few cents more, they might look attractive until you say, where's my check? Well, that's gonna electronically transfer to your account every time we bring it through the cash register. And their POS system can talk to your system, and then you can generate a report. But Jeff, where's Jeff?
Or Jeff had to leave, he'll be back.
He left, okay.
Yeah.
Cause that's a role for Jeff, or people like Jeff, So we have to have a system to plug into theirs so that we seamlessly transfer all that data. We opened a store in the Milwaukee Public Market in 2005. At Michael Fields Ag Institute, we were big advocates and supporters of building a public market in Milwaukee. The person behind it went to Pike's Place in Seattle, loved the public market, wanted a public market in Milwaukee. She raised $10 million. We would go out and set produce up on Art Night in Milwaukee and talk about local produce coming to Milwaukee and getting people to support the concept of the public market and to financially support the public market. So we signed the first contract to be a produce supplier in the public market because I told my staff, we've been preaching buy local for 20 years. Shouldn't we go do it? If it can be done, shouldn't we be the one? So we opened the store in the public market. We jumped through the hoops for the health department. We went through everything for food safety. We had checks on our walk-in and our temperatures and everything else we had to do to keep everybody happy. And we opened our store and they had 20,000 people go through the first week. Everything was great. We had about 20 farmers coming to us, bringing us produce. We're selling local produce. We get at the end of the first month, we lost like $120,000. Our cost of labor was 140% of sales. We couldn't afford to talk to the farmers that were coming to our dock, scratching some numbers on the back of an envelope. Here, you owe me this. The other thing that happens is the farmers would go around and look at the price we're selling things for. So you don't have a transparent market at that point, or you do have a transparent market, which we thought everybody wanted. So Kay Jensen walks around and says, whoa, you're selling my spinach for $6 a pound, you're only paying me $4? It's like, I think I should get $5.75. So now we're gonna renegotiate margins. While I'm paying $5,000 a month rent, I'm paying 3 people full-time labor to talk to her, and she wants all my margin. And so we bled. We lost $300,000 before we stopped the bleeding. My board was not happy with me. I left of my own accord. But not that year. I didn't leave till 2010, so I struggled on. But
You're very brave to tell us that.
But what we realized is, we pay people a lot of money compared to the price of our food. We have a cheap food policy, and margins are narrow. So, we had to get fewer farmers bringing more product to us. And we had to get them to help us integrate some data. They had to come up to some standards. And we started making salads. So we would average maybe $2 a pound retail on the produce side of our store. Maybe $2 a pound. Maybe we had $1.50 in it. We were making very narrow margins. On the other side, we hired bartenders, put a chef jacket on them, had them stand behind a plexiglass with all the fixings for salads, and we made salads in front of people. And so people would come along and we'd say, you want a pre-made salad or shall I make it in front of you? And of course, bartenders don't have jobs during the lunch hour for the most part. And they like to talk and they're outgoing and they talk to people, so you throw a chef jacket on them. You're gonna walk around looking like that the rest of your life? You're gonna start eating salads. Get over here. So we'd toss these salads together and then every salad weighed 8 ounces, 1/2 pound. And we charged $8. We were getting $16 a pound for our produce. Did I care if anybody on the other side brought produce? Not really. So now, the only produce I brought in was the produce that I could use either as a juice or a salad. And they sit in our display cases only for storage until we had time to make them into a salad or make them into a smoothie. We did wheatgrass. At the end of the day, whatever wheatgrass was left over, we put it into shots, we put them in the freezer. Next morning, somebody comes in, they want a strawberry, banana, orange smoothie. Wouldn't you like a shot of wheatgrass in that? Boom, another $3, throw it in. So we started making money. It became evident that this is a mom and pop business and a nonprofit had no business running this business. We sold our store, we exited the market. But what business were we in? We were selling entertainment first. And then we were selling some healthy foods, and then, oh, by the way, it's local and it is organic, and, the people that wanted to support us didn't want to wait for their credit card receipt just like everybody else. So human, behavior still as it is. So, we're gonna scale up production on local corn soybean farms. Then that's the market we're gonna go into, and we're somewhat isolated from it, and it's a matter of how far up the chain, so to speak, you wanna do. I've done a lot of value-added conferences and I always tell farmers that if you wanna make more, you have to do more, and that's just the way it is. Well, when you do produce, you're doing more, you're managing more, you're worried about rains in a different way. You're gonna have a risk management strategy for climate change. But we need to come together in a way that you worry about the things that are in your control, and then the warehouse worries about the things that are in its control, and then we're nested well with the buyer. Financial support, in terms of financial support, I think one of the big things that has been missing and is potentially rectified is whole farm revenue insurance. And I think we have somebody from the USDA, but.
Yes, Teresa's here with us.
Teresa, do you know anything about whole farm revenue insurance?
I don't know if the volume.
No,
Oh, okay.
So
sorry.
I think the catch on the whole farm revenue insurance is you have to have a history. You have a history to insure revenue against. And so you're not gonna have it the first year. But it's really critically important to get crop insurance in the produce space. I rent 30 acres of land in Florida, have 4,000 orange trees. In 2022, we froze our oranges in January. We got hit with Hurricane Ian September 28th, and we just got hit again with Hurricane Milton. So we're growing our oranges organically, we're spending much less than the other farmers. We have healthier trees than most other farmers because we quit putting all the chemicals on them. Our trees were not resistant to either hurricane, but fortunately we had insurance. And so, you know, I know a lot of farmers don't carry hail insurance because they now farm in such a broad geographic area that it's only gonna hit part of a farm anyway, it doesn't really matter. But I think whole farm revenue insurance is something for the producer, and I haven't said it already, I'll say it again now, from a marketing perspective, do you go organic or not? And my recommendation always is, if you're going to a market that pays a premium for organic, you might consider being organic. If you're not being paid to be organic, there's not a reason to be organic. You can, if you're certified organic, it doesn't mean you're regenerative. It doesn't mean you have an extended crop rotation. There are no components about the organic certification that speak to how you're treating the land except having a minimal crop rotation. But certified.
That's not true. I do organic inspecting. There are some regulations that speak specifically about how the soil is supposed to be treated, rotations, that it is in the code.
Right, and like I say, if somebody I don't offend, I'll see you later. So, but if you look at organic farms, and we won't go off into any of these, it's a deep rabbit hole, but,
Your point's true, though.
Yeah, it
Organics,
is
you
true.
can get around the regulations. People found the way to bend them. It's true, but
Right.
it is written in there.
right, and for 25 years, we couldn't use muriate of potash, and now all of a sudden, it's okay.
Sure.
Really? I've been buying that expensive K stuff for muriate of potash, it comes from the earth, it's organic, okay, I'm good with that. But we produce everything on our farms, everything is done organically. We're not certified organic. Our 80-member CSA, no one ever asked if we're organic. They ask how the crops are grown, they go out and look at the gardens. We tell them that we don't use chemicals, but if the market's paying to be certified organic, that's a good reasoning. I think production strategies need to be more in depth than what organic certification requires. Is my point there. So from the financial standpoint, I think agriculture, you know, can innovate around our best thinking. I like to say that American agriculture has tremendous capacity to do the wrong thing in a big way fast. So if you look at where corn has gone, we had leaders of the community that put up more grain bins and then put up a grain lane and then started farming the neighbor's farm. And so we had these models out here of expansion and what those expansion models looked like. And so more farms followed that model until today we're farming to the center of the road ditch. You know, we got 850,000 bushel of grain storage on the farm. We've created this monstrous, you know, corn machine. How do we start the produce machine so that, you know, we can start participating in produce markets that will add significant income? Market development, I'm gonna skip over. I don't think we need much discussion there. Next slide. I've heard from several people here in discussion today about workshops, training, online information. there's a lot of support that's needed to answer questions in transition. At Michael Fields, we had a 2-year course on commercially doing wholesale vegetables. We had classes we called Professional Growers Workshop, and we identified markets and we helped farmers get into those markets. And we had about a 25% success rate. I relayed this story to someone this morning. An offshoot of our program went to Michigan State, and John Beerbaum started a similar program of education. He called me up one day and he said, I'm only getting a 50% success rate. 50% of my farmers go on and produce farm. It's like, well, John, we only have a 25% success rate, and we've been doing it for 20 years. So it's important to have that education and the support available, and it goes past the planting. We can't have a workshop and get you all excited about growing some crops and then not talk to you again until you're gonna bring it back. We need some coaching in the middle, and some mentoring, we need that educational component. And then I've got climate resilience in here as a big thing, and I'm gonna talk more about that in the next set of slides. Go ahead. I'm calling this a collaborative ecosystem. It's an ecosystem of people around an idea, around a vision, sharing that vision of what that's going to look like, and getting into that on those store shelves. So, as I've mentioned, you know, we have to start somewhere, and if we look at some timelines, on short term, I'd say 1 to 2 years, pilot programs, et cetera. I'd say this region has already surpassed the short term. You've been talking about this, there's an awareness, there's farmers that have considered growing produce, there's farmers growing produce. So I think we're down to the mid-term, which is infrastructure development and market expansion. And I think that's exactly where this group's at. And so, long-term, a full-scale regional produce production ecosystem. Next slide, please. So, you want a produce aggregation warehouse. What does that look like? So, if you just look at industry standards, we really need 150 to 250,000 pounds of produce to go through that warehouse. And that's kind of the initial break-even point. And so as we talk to the buyers, you know, what crops would the buyers commit to that they want to buy in tonnage? And then we can start to look at which farmers can grow that. And then we need to look at the warehouse. What can the warehouse do? So you need 3 climate zones in the warehouse. You need one refrigerator at 32.5 degrees and regular humidity. You need another one at 40 degrees. And you need another one at 100% humidity for your greens and the others. You've got to separate ethylene producers from non-ethylene producers. So you could argue that you need 5 zones. I've been in many pack houses, and goodness greenness, the way they had 5 zones is they broke down pallets inside of a cooler. So they used up all of their space. Everything was refrigerated. All the workers had to wear jackets and hats all the time because they did operational things inside of coolers. And that way they maintained the chain of cold, and they were also able to provide 5 areas for different produce that came in the door. But you know, it's the darn ethylene is a catcher in there. In terms of square feet, we're talking about 2,000–3,000 feet of cold storage, loading docks, daily throughput 2,000 to 4,000 pounds. And I did this based on being a seasonal market. We can do some late season crops, some storage crops like butternut, acorn squash, delicatas for the month that they last. Next slide, please. So operating expenses. So this this is using no volunteerism. And so Bob and I also talked that, you know, if we had a warehouse where we had some volunteers, you know, that would help take the edge off till we got things going. But let's just say realistically, we need annual sales going through that warehouse at about 600,000. So at 300,000 pounds, just roughly, we're averaging $2 a pound on our produce, which is a good number, and in terms of the industry, that's a pretty good product mix. There are a lot of products that are gonna be below $1 a pound, and there's gonna be very few products over $3 a pound. And so everything else is gonna be in between, and you need a mix. You need a mix of early season, mid-season, late season. You need a mix of low margin, high margin, medium margin plants. Next slide, please. So, you know, looking at breaking even and using 600,000, that says we have to hold a 20% margin at the warehouse. So Hy-Vee comes to the table and they say, well, we've got a warehouse and we've got trucks, and we got 20% overhead. So now you're gonna come along as a warehouse and you need 20% overhead. And the farmer wants to sell direct to the market and receive 100% of the value. So really, now we're in a competitive space where we have to negotiate this, where everybody can come out where they need to be. So when we look at the expense of the warehouse and the aggregation, you know, maybe that's a fundraising activity. Let's go to the next slide. One more slide. So when we look at the mega trends, where is the value? The value proposition is that in the next 20 years, millennials will be responsible to shift the American diet from 13 to 15% fruits and vegetables to 30 to 33% fruits and vegetables. Why? Millennials have been raised to eat differently. They're going to eat differently no matter what. And it may not be your millennial, but millennials generally. But the other reason is we're not going to solve the health of Americans in this country without changing our diet to 30 to 33% fruits and vegetables. It's exactly that simple. If you go to other countries and you look at their diet makeup, the longest living people in the industrialized world are the Japanese. They have 35 to 40% fruits and vegetables, and I swear the rest of it's fish. And they eat a certain amount of sea vegetables to go with land vegetables. It's amazing. I still can't eat seaweed for breakfast. I just can't get it done.
Depends on what
gotta be-
type of seaweed and
Yeah,
how you
yeah.
prepare
You gotta have a soup with rice.
it, yeah.
Yeah.
I had it for breakfast this morning.
He's
Okay.
living proof that it can be done.
So you can see at the farm gate, our profitability hasn't moved much in the last 2 decades. Where's all the movement? It's on the serving the community. It's serving the end user. Well, the good news is we're serving the end user more fruits and vegetables. Mike Hamm, the CS Mod Endowed Chair at Michigan State University, is claiming now that we need 12 million acres of fruits and vegetables in addition to what we have now to have a US origin fruit and vegetable system. So the opportunity is huge. We raise 100 million acres of corn. Now this year was only 93 or whatever. You know, but basically there's 200 million acres in corn and beans. And so we need to find 10 or 12 million acres of that and put it into produce. And the opportunity is there. And for the innovators that can meet the demands of the markets and meet the demands of the data integration, it's going to be profitable. As I mentioned earlier, if you take an economic worksheet, it's gonna make a big difference of what you put in there for production. So if you put in 30,000 pounds of butternut squash and you put 40 or 50 cents a pound, you've got gross revenues here that look pretty darn good. You can manage most everything else. I like to start out with butternut squash because you don't have to have irrigation, you don't have to have a cooler. If you learn from the Amish of how to season it, butternut will put out runners that are cucurbit and they run all over. So the Amish have the kids throw all of those butternut squash in a row down the middle where the leaves have all died down. And so the sun hits them and they turn a deeper color yellow. And then you send the kids out and they turn them over and that side is still light colored. And so then it turns a darker yellow. And you've now seasoned those butternut squash. They're ready to go to the market at that point. Go out with a hay wagon, you throw them all in the hay wagon, you take them back, put them in boxes, you're ready to go to the market. It's a pretty low bar of entry. It's a pretty high volume crop. One of the things I mentioned to Bob is having worked a lot in Florida and Michigan, what I didn't say earlier about California and Florida, they're year-round cropping and they have their challenges. Michigan's a lot like Iowa. It freezes in the winter. And a lot of farms in Michigan are produce farms. And they produce a lot of produce. We know about the blueberries. Blueberries in Michigan don't grow more than 35 miles inland. Once you get away from Lake Michigan, there's no grapes or wine, there's no blueberries. We're back to the standard fare of produce. So legislatively, farm programs have been geared to keep farmers in corn and beans if they were not in the state of Michigan, Florida, or California. So up until 2018, I used to say publicly that it was illegal to produce fruits and vegetables on your corn ground. And I've been called on that many times. It's not illegal, you just get kicked out of all federal farm programs. So you're not eligible for anything if you put any fruits and vegetables on corn ground, up until 2018. And so you couldn't go to a farmer that had a big cornfield and say, could you rent me a couple acres? Well, I didn't get kicked out of the USDA programs. The majority of my income comes from the USDA. I can't do that. And so it's no longer illegal outside of Michigan, California, and Florida to produce vegetables. So the door has been opened to that possibility. I know a grocery store owner in Wisconsin that had 5 Eagle grocery stores. He sold all 5 of them. He bought one store. He made RTEs, ready to eat foods. He offered catering. He said, I can make more money in one store offering more services to 1/5 the size of client base that I could in 5 supermarkets. And because he was willing to make his foods into ready to eat. And so every time we do a survey, it comes back, the consumer trends are they want more local, they want more nutritionally dense foods, they want to know where it came from, they want more interest. Oh, by the way, did they mention ready to eat? Yeah. They want all of those things and ready to eat. So those are challenges that, they're showing up in megatrends. But realistically, how do we help the farm with that? How does that benefit the farmer? Well, you gotta move up the value chain a little bit. And I think working for a pack house, we could call it a co-op. Co-ops have got kind of a bad reputation because they tend to grow. And then they hire a full-time manager, and then they start fighting over what they're paying. Why are we paying that guy $100,000 a year? It's our money. And then they fire that guy, and nobody takes over, and the co-op goes south. But it could be a co-op, it could be a cooperative effort. It could be, in ethanol, a lot of the ethanol plants were built with some state funding, but the rest of the funding came from the farmers that were gonna sell their grain at the ethanol plant. And so lots of farmers invested in ethanol so they had a viable market for their corn. Well, it makes more sense on paper to invest in a pack house for veggies. And Tony here, you've done that, you know what that looks like. And my message to you today is, we can use a lot more operations like Tony's. There's a bigger market than what can currently be filled. And so, do we help Tony expand his operation? We'll bring all of our stuff over to you. And, oh, no. So,
Chickens will eat well.
so, let's go to the warehouse again. How's that warehouse gonna make money? Has to be other revenue streams coming to the warehouse. And that's why we need a full-time manager if we decide to go to a warehouse that we're gonna put 250,000 pounds of produce through a year. And I'm talking about seasonal produce, talking about fall, maybe, some winter storage crops, potatoes store for a while. That's all encompassed. Maybe the manager has his vacation time coming in the winter. In Michigan, they have to figure that out. So what the pack houses do, in Michigan, they'll have a local on-farm store, and the pack house people will work the store, and then they'll bring all their apples in crates, and they bring other storage crops in, and once the store closes, the workers work all winter packing out everything that's been put in storage, and then they're given a month's vacation, and then they start the next year again. So the most successful pack houses in Michigan are year-round operations with the same employees year after year, and dedicated employees, and well-paid, and insurance. And in terms of labor, working in Michigan and working in Florida, I became acquainted with how work crews work. So in Florida, citrus production is 6% of what the high watermark was for citrus in Florida, down to 6%. The citrus industry is almost dead in the state of Florida. So what's happened to all the work crews? All those oranges get hand-picked. There were 800,000 acres. There's less than 100,000 acres in Florida oranges. So the picking crews down there are intergenerational. So I work with Carlos Gamez, and he maintains 30 to 35 workers year-round. So what does he do with it? Well, this year, they went to Michigan, they picked blueberries, they picked apples, they detasseled corn in Illinois, they're doing grove maintenance. They could have come and got all those Canadian thistles out of the Aronia, but these work crews are looking for work. And so they have slots that are open. And so if we had enough production here, we could get someone like Carlos Gamez to bring in a harvest crew, and they would manage the harvest for a certain number of days. And they're fast, they're efficient, they know what they're doing. So I don't think that's an argument anymore that, there's too much labor. I didn't put any slides in here today on readapting farm machinery, and that's why I was anxious to talk to Jeff here today. I know he does that kind of thing, but pretty much all of our garden equipment, we bought a new fancier cultivator this last year, but I took those old Dearborn frames that used to be 2-row cultivators, and you can make all kinds of bed equipment. You can make bed shapers, you can make cultivators out of them, just make a ton of things. I bought a 4-section rotary hoe. I took 2 sections off. I made individual bed hoes out of each one. One has the teeth all the way across, one has gaps in them for the rows. I sold the other 2 sections to an artist in Milwaukee who was gonna weld them together. It's like, so I ended up selling the other 2 sections for more than I paid for the 4 sections. But there's all kinds of equipment. If it's not in your fence row, look at your neighbor's fence row. There's so much iron in the country still. Drag out that old iron and say, what can you use it for? We use a 1952 all-crop combine.
What size?
I'm sorry?
I got a 72.
You got a 72? Okay. I got the 60. The big improvement was I went to 66 inches after that. But I can harvest red clover, soup beans, buckwheat,
Sunflowers.
sunflowers. obviously oats, spring wheat, winter wheat. So hard red winter wheat varieties that actually will grow here where it rains. Don't let Iowa Crop Improvement sell you on the idea of hard reds from western Nebraska, like Arapahoe wheat. It'll just do terrible here because it's a dry weather climate wheat. You need wheats that have come from Europe, Eastern Europe, or Russia, where they have weather similar to our weather. And so on Washington Island, we were growing Patriot wheat that came from Germany through the University of Guelph in Ontario. And so Destor Spirits is made out of a hard red winter wheat. Their goal on Washington Island was to get to 20,000 cases a year of gin and vodka. And a couple years ago, they went past 70,000 cases a year. And so they're trying to get their story back together. They had what we called, when it was with the Japanese, we called it moral hazard. You know, that's when the organic Vinton soybean guy ends up having 300 acres more production than what he grew. We just call that moral hazard. And you run into that, but
Been there with cucumbers.
But Destor Spirits has the story of Destor and the island, and they do good in England, they do good in New York, Chicago, LA. They've become this boutique wheat, and it's a great story. I've been working with the island since 2006, and it's really helped the economics of Washington Island. I like to say, as a farm community, we need to operate like we are an island, because when you bring everything in on the boat and you have to ship everything out on the boat, you start asking the questions, what can I do here? You know, American agriculture currently uses $36.5 billion worth of pesticides. It's like, wouldn't that be a pretty good market to produce for? If I could produce my own input for that? You know, I think that 36.5 billion is a pretty big market. So what can we do? Can we do our equipment? I'm pretty much convinced that any of the produce we can operate mechanically with up until harvest. We can mechanically plant it. We can use water wheel transplanters. We can use direct seeding. We're almost dictated to use raised beds because of the rain patterns. But we can do these things mechanically, but when it comes to harvest, in our CSA 6.5 acres, everything is still hand harvested. And so of that 6.5 acres, we never have more than 50% of it in active vegetable production. Vegetable production is hard on soil. So you're not gonna practice regenerative ag by growing vegetables every year on the same soil. You've gotta rotate. And people have tried to rotate out into their corn soybean fields. And I can tell you, coming out of Roundup regime and corn soybean production, producing vegetables is a nightmare. You have weed pressure you've never seen before. What I like to do the first year is put a suppression crop on the land, buckwheat, something similar, an intensive crop like wheat. You've got to get the soil back in shape. It'll take 5 years before that soil responds well when you take it out of the high chemical corn soybean rotation. And there's a few crops you can grow the first year, but darn few. So there's a lot of other things we can do. The warehouse could have boxes. So boxes are sold in pallet quantities. Michigan farmers buy them in pallet quantities. You can't buy them in pallet quantities because you'll have too many boxes and they'll go bad before you ever use them all. But the warehouse could buy the pallets of boxes and then sell them by the each. You come in, you need 10 1/9 bushel boxes, because that's what size box the industry demands that product goes in. And so this limited number of books that I brought along with me today takes each and every possible produce item that you can grow in the state of Iowa and what to do with it after you harvest it, how to manage the decay, and what it's gonna look like in refrigeration. Those are all the things you need to know if you're producing those crops. Blueberries are one of the hardest. Blueberries need to be down to 32 degrees. And So we put in what they call tattletales. You throw a tattletale in the pallet. If you cross dock, which very few blueberries are allowed to cross dock, by that I mean they're gonna go to Chicago from Michigan, they're gonna sit on the dock and they're gonna go on another truck because there is no chain of custody while it's sitting on the dock. If that tattletale and that blueberry goes up to 34 degrees, those blueberries are gonna be rejected. So they're tough, they're hard. And so in the chain of custody, when they go to the warehouse, Bob's gonna have that problem. And when they go on the truck, the chain of custody is that truck has that liability. And that truck's gonna know that they were 32, 33 degrees when they went on the truck. There's nothing else as hard as blueberries. They are the worst.
John, I have a question. Okay. Do you know of any other local food system that is bucked the traditional system of boxing? This is really a question for Hy-Vee or Capital City Fruit, but if we build out a new local food system here, why not build in a new way of packaging?
Good luck with that.
You know, the stacking,
The world trades on uniformity. And it's things that go in a bushel and a ninth, go in a bushel and a ninth. And it's apples, it's oranges, it's everything in UPC codes, and it's because of the cost of human labor. Because if you have to keep punching information, your labor cost is going to eat your margin.
Except that those systems have been around for generations, and they're not optimal for today's world. I mean, there's an opportunity for innovation there, tell me I'm wrong.
Well, we've used RPCs for a little while, reusable plastic containers, and those are fold down, fold up type washable containers and
and they have a bin like this.
folds flat
So
plastic.
you can stack safely,
So you can stack a lot of that volume together, reuse those, wash them. We do see some damage from those types of containers as well, that, so you have that loss, but we found that it is also causing some challenges with, pallet building in the warehouse, because you don't have all that uniformity in all those totes, so they're all different heights and sizes, but then you have some that are in the traditional cardboard that you're trying to all build together into one order out to the store, so there's still challenges there. We found that it's we're kind of reeling back from how much we were using those just because of those challenges, so there's all varieties of, packaging out there in the warehouse right now that we're selling.
Are there any international, a lot of this stuff is international standards, right, like you mentioned, so are there any working groups out there right now that you know of?
Trying to change it?
Yeah, that are new standards or new protocols.
Materials, Michael, they're working on materials in California pretty aggressively. But it's more the small to consumer on the shelf kind of packaging, transitioning from cellophane and different plastics into paper products that can be composted. Whereas not necessarily the big boxes that, that come from the farm.
So things that are.
I could be wrong, there may be something.
But that makes sense, there's a lot of interest from folks that I know too, looking for new types of packaging materials that are gonna be, because unlike the United States, most countries have to pay a lot of money to Indonesia and other places to buy their trash. Or like Japan invests a lot in incineration, and they incinerate a lot of it, but this is really expensive, so we don't have a lot of those pressures, so we're just used to throwing stuff away. But internationally, materials are really interesting.
And then the ones that we traditionally use in America are wax lined. And so they can't go in with the other cardboard to be recycled.
It seems like an RPC might be a good option for this type of setup, because, the farms that are participating could use those containers. It could be brought here, and maybe furthered on through the process somewhere. I don't know, do you have RPCs going to you as well?
Hy-Vee wants RPCs, and the other advantage for Hy-Vee is they don't have to destroy or break down those cardboard boxes and
Right.
pack them down and then pay someone, so there's a lot of labor savings in that and material, so they can just recycle those basically. Now for us, it's not the easiest thing to do, but that's a requirement we work around. So to answer your question, and then, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, we have the structure to then collect those from the retail store and bring those back through our
through our supply chain, so those do all get collected up and our drivers bring that back along with some other recyclables that come back to our warehouses then on the way home. And then those are consolidated, organized and reshipped into different, return areas or recycling areas,
So
structures there, I guess.
there's a couple components to that, and one component that I think is overarching. We export $150 billion worth of agricultural products a year. We import $130 billion worth of products a year. We export corn and soybeans, cattle and things of the like. We import food we eat. So we are the consumer. We are the ones that end up with the boxes. We're not going to go to Mexico and change how they box things unless Walmart and everybody else does. And so one of my slides up here, I was gonna talk a little bit about, a whole bunch of pretty good ideas. You can have a whole bunch of pretty good ideas, that doesn't mean they're gonna gel into something that's doable. And for Fairfield region, where you're at on the timeline, I would really focus on getting competent corn, soybean farmers to put attention to producing produce. Start out with 2-3 acres, 5, go to 10, maybe go to 20. We want them successful, we want them profitable. We wanna hook into the market that's already exists. We can do some advocacy. We need to change federal farm programs. We need to make federal farm programs more respective of produce farming. We need to redo our insurance for farms. We need to be taken care of in produce as well as the corn farmers being taken care of. Right now, corn farmers have got a $21 billion bill in Congress to pay them for the shortage between what it costs them to grow corn and what they're getting paid for their corn. Good luck with produce of getting that to happen. So how many battles do we want to take on at the same time? If you want to take over repackaging, good luck.